So hello out there. Good afternoon. We are here talking to Adriel.
Oh, we just practiced on that. We just
I
practiced.
know, I know. Um,
Adriel.
Adriel Lubarsky today. So I'm so excited to have you here with me. You know, I met you just a week ago in Brenda Meller's VIP job seeker office hours, which is such a great resource. So I just want to mention that before we get started. Anyone who's interested in this, you can just learn more about these Friday VIP sessions by going to Meller Marketing. It's MELLER marketing.com and clicking on webinars. So if you're looking for a job, then definitely check that out. So let's get right to it. I'd like to have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and your business.
Sure. What's going on, everybody? So nice to be here, Annette. Thank you so much for the invite, and thank you, Brenda, for inviting me last week. That was a lot of fun. So my name is Adriel. I've been doing startups in one way or another my entire life. Most recently, I was the head of sales at a self-driving car company, where I learned a lot about unemployment and automation. And that got me really thinking about how to help job seekers who are really affected by the huge changes happening in our world due to a lot of things, due to automation taking away jobs, due to automation changing the way recruiting works, due to all of a sudden COVID putting millions of people out of work and really expediting a lot of trends. And so that got me to found a company called Riveter, which is probably why I'm here today. Riveter is the internet's only free interview practice tool, community, and coaching platform. And so I love talking about stories. I love talking about interviewing, and I love talking to you, Annette.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, once I learned about your platform, I did go on there and look around a bit, and I love it. I think it's fascinating, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today, as well as general, interview questions. So, career professionals like me, we tell our clients that, they have to tell a good story. And, people do struggle to tell stories about themselves. And resume writers, we use, or at least I use, and many use, a simple formula. It's the CAR formula: the challenge, action, and result. And, we have people put together stories that talk about it, talk about the impact they've had in that sort of formula. So, can you share sort of the key elements of a strong interview response?
Absolutely. So people talk about this for their entire careers. So my goal is to simplify it here as much as possible. So I really want to focus on two things. The first, obviously, it's all about good storytelling, but what are two things that make up a good story? The first, I think, and one of the most important ones and overlooked ones, is simplicity. So you said one of your favorite acronyms is CAR. One of my favorite acronyms is KISS.
Okay.
Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. And I think the KISS principle of simplifying your stories, of not sharing 15 accomplishments when one will do the trick, of not giving 15 minutes of backstory when 2 lines will do the trick, keeping your stories simple is a really strong technique in an interview answer, because that helps you keep them short, that helps you keep them memorable, that helps you practice them. So the first thing I'll say that makes a good interview answer is the KISS principle. Keep your answers simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. And then the second principle is measure it, right? Where can you share numbers? Did you reduce costs? Did you make money? Did you close a certain number of clients? Did you have did you process Y number of candidates? No matter what job you're in, from janitor to the head of the FBI and everything in between, numbers drive storytelling, because there's something that I'm able to latch onto. Now, there's a lot of other things that we can talk about, but I'm going to follow my first rule of KISS and really start with those two.
Okay. I agree with you completely. And although I do work with a lot of executives, not long ago, I worked with a paralegal who actually was a referral for one of my clients. And, you would say, oh, paralegal, maybe there's not a lot, but there was so much there. She was just so took so much initiative that she went in and revamped the filing system and did all these things. And, she was really a great asset to, for a future employer. So one of the things that I love about Riveter, we'll talk a little bit about the what candidates can do, but the instructional videos that you have. And one of them that I really like is the tell me about yourself. And, candidates get asked that, I'm guessing, in almost every single interview. And they often start with, well, I started my career, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and then I did this. And when the interviewer's eyes start glazing over, that, you really should have stopped 5 minutes ago. So can you sort of give us a little, portion of that, how you answer that? Because I thought it was just really, really incredible.
Absolutely. So one really important principle broadly in interviewing is customization. It's very important to customize your answers to the person you're speaking to, the role you're speaking about, the company you're speaking for. And one mistake that people make in the tell me about yourself question is they mistake it for the walk me through your resume question. They say, tell me about yourself. Great. Well, here's my high school job, and here's where I went to college, and here's what I studied. Actually, I started as studying biology, but then I switched over to English. In college as a marketing associate, and I didn't really like it. So then I got my master's degree, and then 20 minutes have gone by, and I'm drooling asleep because this candidate is boring and it's only talking about themselves, right? In the tell me about yourself answer, I think there's really two things you want to get across. A, you've got the skills for this job, not other jobs you've done, not slightly similar jobs, not just things you like about yourself. I don't think it's a place to bring in, personally, I've got 3 kids or I love soccer, unless you're applying for an education company or a sports company or whatever. So do you have the skills for this job? And then the second thing is, do you have the passion for this job? Prove to me that baseline, I'm talking to somebody worth spending my time on and not cutting this interview short after 5 minutes, but spending my full 30 or 60 with you. That's what the skills come in. And then prove to me that you've got the passion. What excites you about what you do? What excites you about what I do? I, the company, or I, the person interviewing you, right? So if in your tell me about yourself answer, instead of thinking, well, do I talk about my education, or do I talk about how many kids I have, or do I talk about my last job? Put all that to aside for a moment. Some of those are going to be the details of your answer, sure. But instead of talking about that, sit down and think, what proves that I have the skills for this job? And what proves that I've got the passion for this job? I think if you can structure that tell me about yourself answer in a minute or so max, minute 15 maybe, and you could get those two things across, I've got the skills for this job, and here's a proof point, and I'm super excited to be talking to you about this job, and here's a proof point. Now we can start the conversation, and they can dive deeper into any one of those.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, that is the question I think almost every candidate gets. What are say 3 to 5 other top interview questions that candidates should be ready to answer?
Yeah. Well, one important comment there about why everyone gets that question. I think you need to, everyone, it's not brand new that an interview is just a conversation, but think about the conversation from the perspective of the interviewer, right? The person who's there to interview you. Mm-hmm. Always think about their perspective. I think we'll talk a lot about this, Annette. One of our favorite lines at Riveter is communication is with the listener, meaning it's not about what you say, it's about what they hear. It's not about what you show, it's about what they see, right? So the tell me about yourself question, think about why they're asking you that. Well, realistically, and anybody listening here has probably interviewed somebody before. Think about it. Maybe you forgot you're interviewing somebody until this moment. Maybe you haven't looked over their resume, or maybe you did look over their resume, but you only did it 30 seconds ago. Or maybe you looked over it 4 days ago when the interview was scheduled, but you forgot everything about it. Maybe you don't know where to start. Maybe you're nervous. Maybe you're young and you don't interview often. Maybe you're older and you've got 1,000 things on your mind. Tell me about yourself just it takes the pressure off of me, the interviewer, and puts the pressure on you, the interviewee, to make sure I have a good experience too. So why does every interview start with this? There's not some secret tactic or, any amazing psychology behind it. It's because I don't really know what I'm doing as the interviewer, and I'm just trying to see where you're going to take the conversation and make sure it's relevant. So that's one really important point there. What do you think? And I'll definitely share a couple of other answers or questions I think are really important. But what's your thought about the tell me about yourself question, Annette?
Well, I agree with you. I think a lot of the questions that interviewers ask are the same ones that candidates find online. I'm sure there's some kind of a, here's what you should ask in the job interview. And they go through the, tell me about yourself and the what is your greatest weakness and, where do you see yourself in 5 years and all those kind of boring questions. And I agree with you. I think it can certainly be because the interviewer is new or, maybe they're tired or maybe they're just a bad interviewer. And of course, that can have repercussions for the company. Before I was a resume writer, I was a recruiter for a few years. And I actually had a candidate that I was working with and the company actually loved him. They loved him. But he pulled himself out of the process because he just, he didn't feel it with them because he didn't feel the interviewer was able to respond to his concerns, his questions, and his needs. So, that is an excellent point. And I also love the fact that you mention it being a conversation because it should be a two-way conversation.
And it's a red flag when it's not two ways. Certainly a red flag if you, the job seeker, is talking too much. Huge problem. And it's one of the biggest things I work on is people being concise with their stories. But it's also a red flag to me if the other person is talking too much too. And that happens all the time. I remember my fiance being on interviews with somebody and she wasn't wearing headphones and I was just listening in. And the person on the other line was talking and talking and talking. I was just standing there being like, oh my God, what a terrible process. And a company I don't want her to join, a company she shouldn't join. Because a conversation, Annette, goes two ways. It's not just you asking me tell me about yourself, me giving you an answer, and you asking me the next question. It's me asking for your opinion, and it's us brainstorming and talking about things together. So getting into that mindset as much as possible is really, really helpful. I'll give you a very specific example, a personal example. I was interviewing a while ago for a role at it was like a chief of staff role at a vertical farming company. And our entire conversation was just brainstorming about what's possible 10 years down the road if this company were to expand into new cities. And I was like, one of the reasons I was interviewing, like, I thought, how cool would this be if you put this in California where I lived and there's droughts? And they're like, oh, not California. You got to go to Arizona because in Arizona, you have all these farms that are growing lettuce and the lettuce is going. I'm like, Arizona's amazing. I spent time there and I think there's like so many warehouses. And isn't it cool that this thing happened in Arizona? And we just built upon a conversation that went both ways. But the way you get there is you got to know what you're talking about. Certainly, you got to do your research and be a fit. And again, show that you've got the skills for it.
Right.
But you've got to give that other person places to come in, talk, share their opinions, share their views.
Oh, that's such a great point. And, I am not an interview coach, but I know several and I interviewed one recently. And one of the things that she had mentioned to me was really a valuable sort of technique for candidates is as the interview is progressing and things are feeling comfortable, that you start moving into that we sort of conversation as if you are going to be joining their company. So I do have to ask you, obviously based on, you have Riveter, you do believe that prepping for the job interview is important. And, but one thing that I hear from people, candidates and just other people is that, if you are practicing, you are going to sound rehearsed and, maybe a little bit fake during the interview process. So, what's your take on that? How do people avoid that? Getting into that and
yeah,
to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to steal from an awesome coach named Jeff Altman.
Okay.
And Jeff has this line for train for your interview. He says, train, not practice. And we'll talk about training in a minute. I love the word train. Train for your interview like LeBron James trains for a basketball game. Now, what does that mean? That means before a basketball game, and not just an hour before, but for weeks and honestly years or months before, LeBron James goes and shoots 1,000 free throws and then 1,000 3-point shots and 1,000 dunks and does 1,000 moves and does it over and over again. So that when he enters the game, he's not rehearsed. It's not like, oh, well, let me do exactly what I did before. It's no matter how the game plays out, he's been there before and he can adapt and he can use that same move. And you could think about jobs or interview training in the same way. It's not about having a canned, prepared response to a question. It's about training really hard, making sure you've got stories that you can adapt to a variety of questions. And then when I'm in the interview, being able to pivot and take my shot and tell my story from whatever angle the interviewer comes at me from. So it's not about being rehearsed, and it's not about being, scripted. And I hear people, this is one of my least favorite bits of advice is, oh, did you know you could have put a Post-it note with some of your notes next to the camera and they'll never know you're looking at it? I'm like, you're not there to trick somebody into reading a script. You're there to have a conversation. How do you have a conversation? Well, you do it in the same way that a great TED speaker does it, that a great Broadway actor does it, or that a great athlete does it. You train, you put in the work, you rehearse so that when you get in there, you can adapt in so many different ways. And you put your script down weeks before the interview, you're done with the script. Now you're just practicing your story. You're having fun with it. You're playing around. So Jeff Altman gives that perspective of, look, it's not about having your Shakespearean sonnet rehearsed word for word, line for line, and getting the iambic pentameter rhyme scheme right. That's not what you're doing in the interview. Think of it like LeBron. You're shooting free throws for months, or you're dunking in practice for months, so that when you enter a game, no matter what angle you're coming at it from, you can dunk and you can win. Same thing for interviews.
That's a great story. It's great, and I love it. I love the idea of training, and I'm going to be borrowing that from you. And one of the things that you mentioned, and of course I was thinking of, and I have here to ask you about this, is communication. I think that can be a really big stumbling block for people. I've interviewed for jobs myself, and people get into the job interview and they may be all ready, but when you're sitting there, there's that little voice in your head, that little voice that says, gee, what do they think about me? Or, how many other candidates are they interviewing? Or, gee, did I say that right? Et cetera. And the little voice in your head is never like, yeah, you got this. It's always something negative. So in the moment, how do people kind of get out of their head, in the actual interview?
Absolutely. So I think there's two real things. There's one thing that's really, really important that helps you do that, and that is confidence.
Yes.
And confidence is divided into two main portions. The first, training, making sure that you're feeling really good about yourself and your stories, and you've done mock interviews and you've done research and you've practiced to 1,000 different questions, not because you're going to get 1,000 different questions, but just because you're having fun figuring out how you're going to communicate to any point. And that really breeds confidence in your ability to communicate things. And when I train for an interview, I'll write down in Riveter, like I'll go in and I'll write 1,000 different questions for myself that are like big strategic questions. I'll ask myself, let's say I'm going for a marketing role, or I'm coaching somebody on Riveter and they're going for a marketing role. I'll ask them, if you had $100 million budget that you were in charge of for marketing, what would you do? Like crazy big strategic questions, just to get them thinking and practicing and having new creative ideas and building up the confidence to say, wow, I can think really strategically and originally about my role. So the first thing in communication is confidence, because people don't hire the person who's the best for the job. People hire the person they are convinced is best for the job. Yeah. So hate it or not, salesmanship is part of interviewing. And I know it's frustrating because I'm the best engineer, I'm the best retailer, I'm sure you're the best. I got no doubt about it. but someone else is going to communicate better than you, and they're going to win. So confidence is the first thing around good communication. And the second, Annette, smile. Smiling helps in 1,000 different ways. I'll give you 2 specific ones.
Okay.
The first, it helps me be approachable. When I start off a conversation with a smile versus starting off, very serious and focused and whatever, it helps me be conversational. It helps loosen you up. It makes it seem like I'm having a nice time and I'm just here to chat and look how fun I do the job, right? Was the first thing. The second thing that it does, it makes you pause. And if you pause in your communication, then you work on your intonations, and then it helps you think for a moment, and it helps loosen you up. It makes a very big difference in your communication. So if you're concerned about, oh, maybe I stutter a lot, or maybe I just get nervous, or I choke up, or I talk too much, or I talk too little, or I feel like they're getting bored, or I'm not a public speaker, I have an accent, whatever your communication concern is, I will tell you to focus on those 2 things. Or sorry, on the one thing, confidence, divided into 2 things, training and smiling, and you will go very far. Okay.
So I do want to talk a little bit about the platform, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting and compelling to me when we were, on that big Zoom call last week, virtual interviews obviously right now are pretty much standard, or they were pretty much standard, unless you might be, I don't know, maybe the final 2 people that you would go in for a job interview, during the pandemic. But, when I was a recruiter, over a decade ago, employers were already interviewing candidates virtually, even local candidates, because it saves time and it's kind of easier on everybody. The interviewer can just sit at their desk and interview people and not have to reserve the conference room and all that other stuff. So if you can share some of the things, because we talked a lot about, people were asking you about, including me, the whole background setup. If you can just give us some tips about, what do you do with your background, and what do you think about, and then I'd like to chat a little bit about the whole virtual background thing. So if you could just start rolling down that road, that would be great.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is people understand that we were thrown into a situation that wasn't expected. If you don't have a beautiful home office with, 3 books that you wrote behind you and a painting of the Mona Lisa, that's okay. I'm literally in an elevator shaft. My little office that I'm in is truly this big. There's not more, where's my other hand? There's not more space that way. It's 4 inches away. That's what I've got. Right. And that's okay. That's okay. So if you are in a place where you've got children running around, or a lot of pets, or your spouse is also working from home, or you have 3 roommates, look, first of all, it's okay. So how do you overcome something like that? How do you make sure that your background is neat? But also, I don't want to talk also about the foreground, right? What's happening in front of the screen? What's going to distract me? Is my kid going to run by? Is my roommate cooking lunch in front of me, right? What's going on in front of me matters as well. So I'll share it in this way.
Okay.
I like breaking things into 2s. A is keep your background simple, right? Aim for simplicity, no matter what it is. In my case, I've got this window behind me and I got a couple books. It's simple. There's nothing fancy. We talked last week on Brenda's, should I put a curtain over it? I said, well, actually we tried, but it's too small to fit a curtain.
Right.
Never problems. But again, simple, not so much going on. And then make sure that just everyone knows what's going on. All your roommates and spouses and children and parakeets and whatever knows that you got an interview going on. Hey, can you be quiet for 30 minutes? I've got an interview going on, and just don't make lunch right now, right? So if the only simple background in your apartment, because you're 23 years old and live with a couple roommates, is the kitchen table, then great. Go sit at the kitchen table in front of your white wall, wear a nice suit or dress, tell your roommates to please be quiet for 30 minutes, and take your call. So, or if you work out of your bedroom, a bed in your background is okay. Make your bed, put a pretty pillow on it, and move on, right? don't worry. Or if you want to do a virtual background because it makes you comfortable or whatever, if you want to do a virtual background, that's fine. Keep it simple, right? Don't do like, the 1982 Grateful Dead show you were at and make that your background. Just a little office that Zoom gave you, or like, a pretty little library, whatever. Simple is fine. And then move on so I can focus on you, the real content, not like be distracted by people and dogs and children and dressers and whatever else running around in the background.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I use a virtual background. I use them all the time. I have a very teeny tiny house, and in my office is also my Peloton bike and my treadmill. And, I don't want all that stuff going on behind me while I'm, talking to someone on, some kind of a Zoom or video call. And I hear you, we have 2 crazy dogs, and sometimes they, get a little into it. And when I get on something like this, I put them in, separate them by a gate. So I'm not having to jump up and, calm them down. So, it is thinking about a lot of those things. And, it's the phone, the phone always, if you have a cell phone or, even a landline still, it's always going to ring when you're on a video call.
Never need you most, yeah.
Always, always, always. So I would like to talk a little bit, if you can share a little bit about, the whole Riveter and how it works. I noticed I went on and I saw some candidates, I'm guessing, or just clients, users who, were answering various questions. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that they're, it is anonymous. If they're public, you don't know who they are. You can see their face. But it leaves the opportunity for people to give responses and really hopefully helpful responses. And it reminds me a little bit of Photo Feeler, which is a photo site where you can have strangers objectively observe your photo and rate it, and also maybe give you some tips. So how can you give us a little bit of how does that all work? I mean, do people come back and say, oh, I got great tips from somebody else and it helped me, or just give us a little bit?
So I'll give you a super quick overview and then I'll share a philosophy.
Okay, cool.
I'll touch on it a little bit. So super quick overview, Riveter is free and always will be. It's a practice tool, community, and coaching platform for your interviews. So what you can do is you can go on there. You can learn by watching tips about how to answer different interview questions. You mentioned the Tell Me About Yourself tip that I recorded.
Yeah.
You can learn by watching how hundreds of other job seekers have answered over 1,000 questions now. We just hit the 1,000 mark a couple days ago. And you could just watch how other job seekers are answering questions. They aren't like fancy coaches and scripted YouTube videos. This is just someone named Steve who's looking for a job somewhere in America. And you'll say just your industry and years of experience, so you get sort of a semblance of who they are, and then you just get to watch how they answer questions. And then you can learn that way. You can give them feedback. So you can say, hey, Steve, like this story confused me, or hey, Steve, I'm not in your industry, so be aware. It felt like a lot of jargon, or hey, Steve, I would be your manager in this situation, and I feel like you didn't really show leadership in your answer. Whatever, right? You can give that specific feedback. And then most importantly, you can actually go in and practice your own answer and practice your answer to thousands of interview questions. The default is always to keep them private. So nobody can see them except for you. If you want to, you can click a couple buttons and share them with the rest of the community. Or if you're working with a coach, you can share them directly with your coach. So nobody sees it but you and the coach. But the default is always private. So if you want to practice, but you just want to just get in the zone and try a couple answers and see how it is you're speaking. And there's a 2-minute time limit. We cut you off after 2 minutes. So you want to make sure you're not speaking too long. That's
right. Yeah.
There we go. So that's kind of basically how it works, and we can talk about some more details there. But the quick philosophy, I started mentioning it earlier, communication is with the listener. What that means is, Annette, if you go on there and you record and you write, let's say you're looking for a job in recruit, or let's say you're looking for a job as a career coach, but you want to join our organization. You write like, Annette, career coach, 25 years experience. And then you go in and you record your answer to strengths. And so what are your biggest strengths? When I listen to you as a fellow career coach, I'd be like, oh, Annette, I thought this was really good. And I'd hire you because I think you talked about this strength that really matters. But when somebody in marketing listens to you talking about strengths, and they're like, Annette, I work in marketing, and actually this really concerned me because I think you'd be really hard to promote if you join our organization because it sounds like you do too many things. Different people are going to take your answers in different ways. And it's really important for you to know that, because in an actual interview, you're going to be interviewing with 4 to 8 or 10 different people with different roles and years of experience and backgrounds. And a marketer is going to care about different things than a seller. Then it's going to care about different things than your boss, than a peer, than a report. Everyone's going to care about different things. So communication is what the listener means. The best way to get better at interviewing is to watch a lot of other people interview and to let other people watch you interview and give you feedback.
No, I agree with you completely. And, that's, it's similar to actually my philosophy with the resumes that I create for my clients. And, you have to make sure that whoever picks up your resume is going to understand what you do. So if you're just too much jargon and you're writing it strictly for the hiring manager, you may have the human resources associate given a pile of resumes and a job description and told to pick out 5 people to interview. That happened to me, where I was one of the people that this HR associate just picked and they interviewed me and hired me. But you have no idea who is going to be reading your resume. And people also think all the time about the ATS, but you have to think of all about the human reader. So another thing that what I thought was really interesting and kind of cool about Riveter is the idea that you can put in your own questions. Mm-hmm. And then, so how does that work? Is there any guidance for, if I went on there and I was wanting a job in marketing and I want to sort of put in my own questions, is there any guidance for me to tell me, how to phrase them or?
Yeah, so it's totally up to you. So if you have an interview coming up, you might, what a lot of people do is they'll have a Google Doc and they'll write down a bunch of questions in their Google Doc and they'll write down some answers, and that's as far as they go. But as we talked about, actually training and practicing your answers out loud and making sure you can tell them well and other people appreciate them. You're like, all right, I'm not going to type them out. I want to actually say them out loud, rewatch myself, get feedback from some others. So you can go into Riveter, and there's a tab there where you can just write some of your own answers and customize them. So, we have one user who uses this a lot, and he's in retail. And so every time, sometimes he interviews for wholesale companies, and sometimes it's for big box retailers, and sometimes it's for retail startups. He'll write a bunch of new questions for himself and then go and practice his answers to those. Sometimes the questions are the same, like tell me about yourself, but his answer is different, right? Because he's customizing it. So if he's interviewing with a retail startup versus Walmart, he's going to have slightly 2 different answers about tell me about yourself. And sometimes they're very particular. For example, he might push himself and say, I'm interviewing with a startup that just raised $100 million. One question I might write myself is, if we had a $50 million budget for expansion, what are the geographies in which you would expand us, right? He's not going to ask himself that for Walmart, because Walmart, that's an irrelevant question. But for us, that's a very relevant question. So you've got the option to go write in those questions for yourself. Obviously, all totally free. Go practice as much as you want. Or if you want a coach to do it for you, it's great to have a third-party professional who's done this 1,000 times. They'll look over your resume. They'll look over the job description you're applying for. They'll assign you a half dozen or a dozen questions that you're really likely to get in your interview. Then you'll go practice your answers to those, share them specifically with your coach, and then your coach will watch them within 24 hours and leave you feedback. So it's a really nice, whichever one you choose, it's a really nice way to basically get a customized mock interview.
Okay, great. So obviously we just got some kudos from our audience. So we really appreciate that. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to talk a little bit about those as well. So my last question kind of about the platform is, if I am making up my own question, and you have these different employers that you're targeting with this answer, does it say that in the interview questions so that if I'm in there looking, I'm just another user, I will know who you're targeting?
Yeah, so as much as you want. So you can write in like who you're practicing for so other people know. Sometimes when somebody posts their answer publicly meaning to the Riveter community, they'll say in the comments, hey, by the way, I've got an interview coming up with this firm or whatever. They'll be able to try it that way. I wonder, can I think I can. Annette, can I share my screen? Would that be all right? Or is that going to break things?
I'm not sure how that works. I haven't done that yet. Can you?
All right, no worries. I saw a share screen button, so I wasn't sure how it's going to go.
I haven't used it yet, so I'm not sure what will happen. So I'm sorry.
All right, no worries about it then. We don't have to.
If you want to try it, you can.
I see Ayodeji. I hope I pronounced Ayodeji Dennis A. I see you're in the audience here. So if you can just tell me if you can see my screen, that would be lovely.
I can tell because I'm looking at it on LinkedIn. So I can, if you want to try it, go ahead.
Perfect. All right. Do you see it on LinkedIn?
No, but LinkedIn runs a few minutes behind. I'm not seeing it here. Let me see if I can switch to this. Try it now.
All right. It says I'm screen sharing and my screen is open.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Alas. All right. Maybe no.
I'm not seeing it on here. So I put us into the 2 people in the screen sharing. And so.
All right. So
sorry.
No luck. That's okay. So let me stop my screen share then. Sorry, folks. Wanted to show you exactly how it worked. But you can go to riveterworks.com and obviously it's free and check it out for yourself then.
Okay, cool. So, and I do have one final thing on this. If I have a client, I'm not a career coach, but if I were, or an interview coach, would my clients be able to go on and use Riveter, and then I could go on and look at their?
Absolutely, okay. Absolutely. So we work with a lot of coaches who use this either with existing clients. So for example, this one coach named Lisa, what she does, the way her interview package works is they can only buy 2 mock interviews with her. She doesn't do just one. You have to buy 2 mock interviews, and she'll assign you a few questions on Riveter before her first mock interview to get a baseline. And then she'll assign you a few questions after your first mock interview with her to be able to give you some extra feedback. So if you're a coach, that's one way you can use it. Just give your clients a little bit of extra training. And the second way is we actually have a variety of coaches. I mentioned Jeff Altman earlier. Anna Morgan at Career BFF is another. Catherine McLean at CMC, Catherine McLean Career Coaching. Caitlin Richards is an amazing coach at Crafted Careers. All of them actually work with people specifically through Riveter. And so what they'll do is you could be one of their clients and they'll assign you questions. If their career coach will assign you, the client, the job seeker, a few questions to practice. You'll share them directly with the coach. So if you are a coach and you're interested in using Riveter with existing clients, looking for new ones, giving extra training, whatever, or you're just a job seeker who's looking for either professional coaching or a free platform to be able to practice, get feedback from each other, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, by email, anywhere you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. So we've been talking a lot about sort of during the interview, what you do during the interview. But I always recommend that the clients that I work with that they research the company and the interviews, et cetera. So what would be your recommendations for pre-interview prep, beyond the interviewing?
Yeah, absolutely. So research is so important. And research covers many topics, right? There's some that folks have probably heard before. If you're interviewing for a public company, read their last annual letter from the CEO, learn what the priorities are, maybe find the company's Twitter or LinkedIn, see what they've been talking about. Then you can go towards the individual, right? Who are you going to be interviewing with? Oh, Annette is interviewing me. Where has she worked before? Where did she go to school? What is she posting about? So I can try to bring those into my interview. Don't force them in unpleasantly and uncomfortably, but researching the role in the company, some of those basics, super important. So you can, in that example I was giving with the vertical farming company, so you can have these higher level, interesting conversations that really shock the interviewer. right? Let's say somebody asks you, let's say you're going for a role as a data scientist, and no, this one's better. Let's say you're going for something in logistics at a large company, and at a company like McDonald's, right? You're going for a logistics role at a company like McDonald's, and somebody asks you a question like, tell me about a really interesting project that you put together for a previous company, right? That's our example. There's a couple ways you can go about it. Example one is you tell somebody about an interesting project that you worked on in the last company. Maybe you do a good job. You share it concisely, you use the KISS principle, all that stuff is great. Or imagine this. That's a great question, Mr. Interviewer. You know, I was actually reading your annual report, and I learned there that McDonald's spends $1 billion a year on last mile delivery. So I thought I'd share how when I was working at my last company, I cut their last mile delivery costs by 30%. And so here's that story. And you know what, if you wanted to, I actually thought about a couple ways in which McDonald's might run some experiments to cut their last mile delivery costs. Do you mind if I share those? Right?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Those two makes a bigger difference.
Yeah, it certainly does. And, one of the ways that people can also find out about, what's going on at the company and, maybe get a little, inside scoop as to who else they're looking at, et cetera, is, doing informational interviews with other people at the company. So, any tips on how to conduct those? I mean, people often say, oh, I don't know, who do I know at a company? But if you start, you ask your friends and your family, and you don't know that maybe your aunt doesn't know someone at your dream employer. Hi, Sarah. That's my buddy Sarah. So, you have no idea where the people work, and there's always your alumni association, and so many things. So, what are some good ways to maybe approach people to do the interviews with you, and questions to ask them when you're there?
Absolutely. So look, approach-wise, LinkedIn's the best tool in the world for that. Type in the company, look for second connections. You're going to be connected with someone somewhere, and reach out to every single one of them with a customized message, because the likelihood of them responding is not that high. So you've got to up your numbers there, and you've got to find a way to talk to somebody. Because if you could bring that into the interview, hey, I talked, why do I want to work here? Well, I was talking to Sally, and she told me this place is amazing, and so that's why I want to work here. That's a much better answer. Even then, I read on your website you have this particular value, right? Mm-hmm. Saying that you talk to somebody, super, super valuable. Now, I have two thoughts around informational interviews that are really important. I'm a real rule of twos guy.
Yes, I love it. That's great. It's really easy for people to absorb when they say, okay, you do this and you also do that, rather than talking. So that's great.
That's the goal. So I have two thoughts there. The first one is, don't just reach out to people currently working at that company. Reach out to people who used to work for that company. And here's why. If you reach out to 10 people who currently work for the company, you say, hey, my name's Adriel, I'm interviewing for a role there, and I'm looking to learn more about it. Or even, hi, my name's Adriel, I thought your company's interesting and I'd love to learn more about it. All of a sudden, they're a little nervous, and maybe HR is going to get upset, or they got stuff going on, and who knows, right? But if you reach out to people who used to work for the company, they've got no holds barred, and they will be very honest and open with you, and they're not worried about HR. So you can ask them really tough questions like, why did you leave? What did you think of the leadership? Do you know the people on this team? Would you work for this team? And they're not worried about offending anybody. They're going to tell you the right answer.
Right.
So that's the first tip, is reach out to people who used to work at the company. My second tip, be very diligent on these conversations. What I see that's a huge mistake in it, and this ruins relationships professionally, is when people use informational interviews as a time to chit chat. When they say, oh, Annette, thanks for getting on the call with me. How are you doing? Are you doing good? Great. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. What are you doing this weekend? Okay, great. Cool. Okay. Now that 20 minutes are up. So what do you like about the company, Annette? Okay. All right. That sounds great, right? That's what most people doing an informational interview and it kills me because you're bored. You're wasting your time. You feel like you're not giving me any value. I'm not getting any value, right? Negative on all fronts. Treat informational interviews like the best salesperson you've ever met treats every single prospect. Come with specific questions. Do your research. Ask them detailed questions. Annette, I saw you work on this. What is your specific work like? Annette, I saw this project you released. What did that project look like for you? Annette, I know you work under the marketing department. What do you think of the new CMO? Annette, I saw that the CEO does open conversations every Friday. What are those like? Right? Come in with specific questions based on research and do not waste anybody's time. Be the professional that so many other people are not. So those are my 2 tips for informational interviews.
I love that, the idea that you have to, be mindful of people's time. Now as we're getting back and people are, moving, back to in-person, meeting. I'm starting to have lunch with my girlfriends, which is so wonderful. It's, I hope that people won't go back to can we meet for coffee? Because it takes so much time out of somebody's day for them to actually, leave their office and come to the coffee shop. And while, I might think, it's really generous of me to say, join me and we'll have lunch, or we'll have coffee or something. I'm sure that the person who is busy executive is not wanting to hear that. So what do you suggest? A phone call maybe, or, maybe a Zoom?
You got to make it as easy as possible for the person, right? Person's doing you a favor. Be very clear about that. And I know give before you get and make sure you're giving them value and yada, yada. All that is true. But let's be real. You need something. Someone else is doing you a favor by being there for you. Make it as easy as possible for them so they don't have to change their routine. Now, that being said, I do think that there's a lot of value to in-person connections and meetings when they're used right with the right kind of contact. So, for example, if I'm speaking for a high-level position, interview number 3, and I've known somebody for a while, I might say, hey, if you're comfortable, and by the way, I'm vaccinated or whatever, and I'm happy to meet outdoors and come to your neighborhood, I'd be very happy to get a cup of coffee for an hour and do this in person, or even 30 minutes and do this in person, in the coffee shop on your block instead of over the phone. I think that you going out of your way to be there will bring value. But you don't want to offer that to everybody, because for most people, that's going to be mostly annoying. Even if you come to my block, all of a sudden like, oof, what if I don't like this person? I can't think of an excuse to leave, right? Make it super easy for me. But if you are at a high level and they're at a high level, or you're at the same level pretty much, or you already moved a couple steps along, or this is like you've really prepared something for it, there are avenues where in-person meetings might work and will have a really big impact. But then the bar is way raised in it, right? If you thought you need to come prepared for a 20-minute Zoom phone call, you better really impress me with what we're going to be talking about over coffee for an hour, because I could have done this over Zoom and not dealt with my walk to the coffee shop.
Yeah, that is, that is so true. And, I love that idea of asking, but, making it very apparent, if you're too busy, I understand you're a busy person. So if that doesn't work for you, I'm totally okay with that.
Your neighborhood, right? Make it easy for them. The reason Zoom works or phone calls work is because you're making it easy for them. You say, hey, here's my calendar. By the way, send your calendar link. Use a service for free like Calendly or something like that. Make it easy for them to book it with you. Make it as easy as possible for them. The way I write it is I'll have a line where I'm like, thank you so much for agreeing. I'd love to speak. Here's my calendar so you can book a time, or you can let me know what works. So I'm giving them both options. And by the way, if you prefer to meet in person, I'm vaccinated and would be very happy to come to your neighborhood. I'd be happy to do that. Just let me know. And most of the time, they're still going to take the Zoom call because it's easier and they're used to it and whatever else. But making that as an option, if you're comfortable with it, if you feel like it, is entirely fine.
And you never know. They may welcome the chance to get out of the office. So, so you really, really never know what that would be. So, we've talked about a lot of things on here, and communication and all of that. So what would you say is beyond the communication? Is there any, one stumbling block that you think, candidates have? My thought is maybe it's fear, but what would you think?
Fear is a beautiful one, Annette. There's you ever read a book called Dune? It's a science fiction book. I don't know. It's a
No.
you got to be pretty culty to have read it, but it's a great science fiction book called Dune, and there's a beautiful line that fear is the mind killer. Fear is the mind killer. Fear can control you. Look, we talked in the very beginning, train like LeBron. Is LeBron nervous before a game? Sure, why not? It's the playoffs or whatever, especially early on in his career. He was nervous before a big game. Did that stop him? Was he afraid of a big game? Absolutely not. So when I say fear is the mind killer, that means you've got to go stand in front of one of the things I do in my talks a lot is I talk about a pregame ritual. And I say what you do in the 15 to 30 minutes before an interview starts is as important as what you do in the 30 minutes of the interview. Are you frazzled? Are you running around getting things finished? Are you doing some last minute research? Are you doing your first ever research? Are you standing in front of the mirror and giving yourself a little pep talk with your hands on your hips and head held high, right? Are you changing into your lucky underwear? Are you giving yourself whatever? What are you doing before that to make sure you're walking in as confidently and in control as possible? So you brought up fear, and so that's the one I'll double click on. Look, fear is the mind killer. And if you've been unemployed for 4 or 8 or 14 months, you're afraid that if you don't get this job, you're in a worse financial situation. I get it. And if you got rejected 10 times over the last 5 months, you are afraid that you're going to get rejected again. I get it. I absolutely get it. But nobody cares. People just don't care about you. They care about themselves. They care about the role that they're filling. They care about their business. And if you come to them afraid, they're going to smell that and they're going to try to figure out, oh, is this person afraid because they're untouchable? Because they're like, no one else wanted to hire them? What is the signal? And I understand, look, we can talk about stigmas and stereotypes and assumptions and all the problems all day long. And we can all get on our pedestals and share how what a problem they are. And absolutely, they're a problem. Nevertheless, they are there. And so your job is to put yourself in the best position to make sure that I, the interviewer, don't make those assumptions about you. That you come in cool, calm, collected. That you are not afraid of anything. That you are here to chat. That you are well researched and well liked. And oh my God, anybody wants you. And you're just doing me a favor by interviewing with my company. How amazing. Right? That mindset is not an easy one. And depending on how long you've been job searching, or if you're coming back into the workforce after parenting for 20 years, whatever it is, it absolutely, it is hard. But that is no excuse. Nobody cares.
No, I agree with you. And, I love when you talk about kind of the Superman pose. I've written about that myself. I saw it originally, it was on like Grey's Anatomy. They were doing it. And I think it's Amy Cuddy that writes about that and has a TED Talk, I think, about that. So it's really cool. I do that too. I get excited and nervous and everything before something like this, but you know what? I listen to a little music and dance around my office before I start. So, I'm glad that you brought up the whole ism thing. And when I was a recruiter, I actually was invited into a panel. I wasn't actually a panel. I was a guest in a group. It's a workforce group for people over 50 that have it difficult to finding a new job. It was a state. Sort of state-run program. And a lot of the things they asked about was, ageism. So I have a story I'd love to share. When I was working as a recruiter, I worked with a woman. She was actually in her 60s. I didn't ask her. We were pretty friendly, while I was working with our candidate. And she mentioned it to me. And I was at that time recruiting in the digital marketing space, which is a young industry. And I didn't place her, but she was one of the top candidates for a position that I was trying to fill. She was like one of the top 3. And not long after that, she got a job, with another company. And, when you looked at her LinkedIn profile, her photo was just engaging and energetic. And when you spoke to her on the phone, that's who she was. And, that whole thing, that makes the difference. The attitude makes a big difference. And, if you go in expecting people to think you're, too old or too young or too whatever, you may very well read things that aren't really there.
It's the Dr. Seuss line, right? Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Whether you think it exists or you don't think it exists, or you refuse to believe it exists, or you're maybe maybe, right? Maybe. What are you going to do? You're not going to solve it from the outside. So you better, whether you're, 80 years old and you're trying to break in as your first software engineering job, or you're a minority trying to break in an all majority organization, or what, yes. The answer is yes. All these problems are out there. Yes. But if you walk in and you say, I'm never going to get this because I am blank, then you're right. Like you're right. Then you proved it right. You're another statistic. Yes, America's got problems. You're right. But if you walk in and say, I don't give a damn, I am really good at this, and I can be good at this for your organization, and my skill sets are different. Yes, I am 30 years older than your other applicants. You know what that means? That means I'm 30 years wiser. That means I've led larger teams. That means I've been through more recessions. That means I can look around corners. That means I can manage people. That means I can help you tap into a new market. Yes, I'm the only minority applying for this position and everyone else is another gender or race or whatever. Yes, but you know what that means? That means I have an outlook nobody else has. That means I can help you tap into a new market. That means I can help you bring a new, you have advantages no matter where you're coming from. And you can come in and say, I'm too old, I'm too blank, I'm too smelly, I'm too pink. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And you got advantage, except smelly. No, probably no advantages for smelly.
No, none for that. No. That's great. This has been a great discussion. I've loved it. It's been so informative. As we're sort of winding down here, is there anything that you'd like to add? Something that I haven't asked you, we haven't discussed, that you'd like to just, add here at the end as we're about to sort of say goodbye?
Absolutely. I'll end with one of my favorite lines, which is, a gap on your resume is not a gap in your life. I think much of your audience is unemployed. Some of them are employed and they're just looking for new jobs, but I'll talk specifically to the unemployed ones. A gap in your resume is not a gap in your life. Just because you didn't work a full-time job for X amount of time doesn't mean you were not worth anything during that time, or you couldn't accomplish anything during that time. I encourage everybody who feels the angst and the frustration and the fear of unemployment to take a breath and to realize, I'm going to get out of this. And once I get out of this, make sure I look back upon this time with gratitude, because if it wasn't for this time, I would be missing blank in my life. I'll be missing these memories I made with my kids. I'd be missing the amount of time I spent with my parents. I'd be missing the fact that I picked up an instrument or a sport. I'd be missing the fact that I did all this career reflection and wound up with this amazing job. I'd be missing the 300 networking conversations that I had with new people who I can call. You are going to be missing something during this time. And if you only look at your gap on your resume as a gap in your life, as a waste of time and something you regret, and it's only been awful, then it's going to be that way, and that's going to really suck for you. But if you can look upon it as an opportunity to say, well, a gap in my resume really just means I've got more time for all these other amazing things, you're going to really come out on top. So that's where I want to end. I encourage everybody to, no matter what situation you're in, find that thing that you wouldn't be doing otherwise, that now you are given the chance to do.
Well, thank you so much for that. I agree with you. You start thinking about changing this or changing that in your life, and you never know what else is going to change. So you really, really have to do that. So thank you again so much. Thank you to everyone who's out there listening now and who will be watching on the replay. I will be checking the comments and responding to you. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend. So
thank you guys. Have a good weekend.